Before the Buddha, there was Dhammakaya. After the Buddha, there was Dhammakaya.
So today let's continue this explanation, or this breaking down or demystifying the architecture of our consciousness. This mechanism by which this I, this idea, sense, perception of me, and this witnessing presence that seems to be there always in the background, where does this come from? We've looked at the ego and a brief explanation of the way we accumulate conditioning tendencies, the way the I maker, the perception and idea of self at the sort of personalized level evolves through the life. We've looked at this basic ground, or this what appears to be this witnessing presence, how that is arising behind our active consciousness moment to moment. And I explained how that witnessing presence itself is only a conditioned part of our experience, and that there is something more fundamental to that, which is a state of pure awareness, which is the experience. The experience is the awareness. This is the non-dual state. So the Buddha teaches us that it is the fading away in stages of the sense and perception of self within the experience that is the flavor of liberation. So even the witnessing presence, which we might have perceived to be this all-pervasive I or soul, though it is deep and profound and an extremely fundamental part of the experience of life that we have, the being there in the middle of it, it is that keeps us separate from what we're experiencing and precludes or excludes us from a state of total absorption or unification, what we might call samadhi. So, having identified these two aspects of self, the egoic self and the big self, where does this big self or the witnessing presence come from? To understand this, we really need to understand the architecture of consciousness. Now, the Buddha, he said himself, he said, look, I do not ask you to believe what I say. Don't take the word of a great teacher just because he's been revered by many. Don't take the word of a book that has been read and respected for generations. Put reverence and full attention to what they say. But until you have seen for yourself, it is not knowledge, it is not truth. The Dhamma is the truth. So what he's saying is that we have to train and build in stages our capacity to see into our experience until we see it for what it is. Until we've seen it for what it is, we are only subscribing to views or confused by it, and it's a mystery. There's nothing wrong with it being a mystery as long as we are fully open to it. But that's our nature. We find it difficult to fully open and trust until we know what it is we're involved in. Which is why, for centuries, folk have headed off to quiet places to develop their capacity to see into, which is what we call insight. So I'm going to give an explanation of the architecture of consciousness and invite you to start your own, what the Buddha calls yonoso manasikara, the skill of wise attention that brings us to a state of seeing as it is what is. So we aren't standing on conjecture. You're not subscribing to what I might be telling you or what another teacher might be telling you or what you have read in the book. These are just views. And it is this clinging to views that creates the veil of conditioning that stops us opening and seeing as is what is. So one of the things we have to start to understand is that awareness itself is fundamentally, that awareness itself is not mind. The mind we need to see as what we are adding to our experience. So the moment that we more than just apprehend the visual impression as it is, or the sound as it is, or the feeling as it is, the moment we add either a reaction or a story or an idea, this mind is only something we're adding. So all of our perception, which creates our personalized sense of what we're involved in, most of it is I-making. I added with the mind, behind which there was the experience as it is. This experience is not arising in the mind. The experience arises within a mirror-like quality of awareness, which purely reflects the experience as it is. It hasn't got anything to say. It just is. This awareness arises through the heart, through a subtle element in the heart that in Sanskrit is called Hadayavatu, or in Pali Hadayavatu, which means the base of the mind. Hadaya means heart and mind. The fundamental basis of consciousness arises through the heart base as awareness, to which we add our mind. I like it, I don't like it, I accept it or reject it or whatever. I think it might be this. The whole paraphernalia of mind gets added to this basic state of awareness. Now, if we meditate, it doesn't take long, if we learn how to pay attention skillfully, to perceive that there is a light in the heart. There's light everywhere. Every time the mind arises, it produces light. The quality of that light depends upon the quality of the mind, small mind, and depends upon awareness itself. The light produced by the mind has all kinds of display, which is why when you're meditating, you might perceive colors in different parts of your body. This is the display of the energy of mind. It's baffling, bewildering, and it's constantly changing, and it never appears the same twice. But if you learn to meditate in your heart, behind the display of your mind, which gradually, as your mind becomes more refined and purified, the color and the movement and the swirling becomes more consistent and eventually becomes white and bright. The light of a concentrated mind is a clear white light, or is a brilliant white light. Behind that, there is a clear, transparent luminosity which hasn't got color. This is the light of awareness. We call this the light of awareness. Now, we perceive that in the lower part of the heart, and it shines with a luminosity depending upon the clarity with which we pay attention and the lack of disturbance from the mind. So the more the mind is active, the more disturbed is the heart base. Think about the heart base where you register your experience. You're registering it in awareness, and that mirror-like quality of awareness is actually a mirror made of water. So as soon as you throw a reaction at your experience, it's like throwing a pebble in the pond. And the mirror-like quality of the water gets disturbed. And now you have a distorted perception of reality. Most of the time we're looking out at the world with a distorted perception. Even if we've got a very refined spiritual view, we throw that spiritual view at the experience and see it through that lens, and so distort the suchness of things for the purpose of seeing what we are looking for. So even ideas, conceptions, spiritual attitudes, all of this, not just reactions, everything is a pebble thrown in the pond that conditions the state of the mirror. Only when we have learned to leave everything completely alone does the total mirror-like quality of awareness reveal itself, and at that moment it reflects perfectly the experience as it is. Like a moon shining in the ocean on a stormy night, the reflection doesn't look anything like the moon. But the moon, shining in a totally still pool of water, you look at it, you know this is the moon. Until we can leave our experience alone and not add any ideas to distort our perception, we won't see it for what it is. Now, how does this clear light of awareness relate to the sense of me? Every moment that you apprehend any experience, we react to that experience, and that reaction is the impression that is registered in awareness. There is a consciousness that is arising through the heart base every moment to apprehend the experience, that connects one moment of experience to the next and is called bhavanga. How do you know this? You can only perceive this gradually through your experience of meditation. When I explain the mechanism by which concentration arises, and more specifically absorption concentration or samadhi, we can see and separate out the bhavanga consciousness as the connecting stream of awareness or consciousness, and mind as what we're adding occasionally to it. In this bhavanga consciousness itself, there is a flavor which gives a sense of me. There's no ideas associated with it. We don't even remember where that came from. It takes great discernment to see what the object and the charge or the nature of this bhavanga consciousness is. But it arises in every moment of our consciousness. Even when we are practicing meditation very deeply, resting, looking out or watching, being the witness, this bhavanga consciousness itself is the witness. The awareness of bhavanga that just leaves all the things that are coming, and the way that we're taught to just rest in the center of the experience upon the witnessing presence. We're basically coming to rest in bhavanga as it arises moment to moment. And in it is a single flavor that has been consistent through this life and won't change until we die. The mechanism by which consciousness links from one life to another, we'll have to talk about at another time. But at the beginning of this life, consciousness arose in this stream, pulling with it a charge of impressions from a previous life. That impression, that single charge that arises to anchor us in this experience, we call the rebirth linking consciousness. It becomes the object of bhavanga in this life. Which means every time bhavanga arises, what should we call it? You can call it what you like. If you want, you could call bhavanga your memory or your unconscious. Every time your unconscious pool of everything you've experienced arises to apprehend something new, that arising of bhavanga arises with the flavor of the I within the experience, and it doesn't change. So it appears when first we apprehend it to be a constant, fixed part of our being. And because we can cast our mind back over the past, through this life, we see that it hasn't changed. That bhavanga, even though the heart base is shaking and unconsciousness is producing impressions that are distorting our experience, the basic ground of bhavanga is constant, right through the life. And it is the yogi who apprehends bhavanga, this life continuum consciousness, as unchanging throughout his life, perceives it to be the big I, the soul, the essence of my being. When we stop and rest there, as the witnessing presence, the sense of the big, unfading, unwavering I remains. Surely this must be my soul. And because in that moment that you rest there, you're not adding disturbances with your mind, the reactive mind has stopped at the point at which you apprehend bhavanga, it feels to be at peace and eternally so. Because momentarily, at any time that you come to rest in it, you're not disturbing it. And so we come to the perception this bhavanga is eternally at rest within itself. Or is eternally peaceful? Or is a state of love? Where does that love come from? We need to explain that. So, how far have we got here with this explanation? The clear light in the heart base, that is the ground of awareness arising momentarily with us, with every moment. This clear light itself, only when this bhavanga consciousness also comes to cessation does that clear light become vast, expansive, and we realize that light in the heart is the same light that we perceive externally as pure awareness. Now when we apprehend awareness as such, there is no self within it. There is no separation between me, the experiencer, and what I'm experiencing. There is only a unified state. It is not possible to explain it. There is no point in me to sit here to try and explain to you the flavor of that. I can try. But the mind can't apprehend that because it hasn't ever experienced something like that. The mind cannot experience unification. Unification has the flavor of the cessation of the mind. So we have two aspects of consciousness that have to come to cessation for the unified state to arise within us. First, our active mind has to become quiet and stop. And then even bhavanga, the witnessing presence, has to come to cessation and stop. And only then and only then, do we have an experience that is liberated of all perception of I or self. And at that point, when we look into that experience, we can't find any ground for any eternal being. We realize that even that what appears to be pervasive sense of I arises conditionally, and it is the coming to cessation without remainder of all conditioned states that the Buddha calls nibbana or enlightenment. The mechanism by which that arises, we will have to explain later. We can only put this jigsaw together piece by piece. But to begin with, what can you do to verify what I'm saying? You practice. You practice this to discern the clear light in your heart and see where that leads you. Now, having said all this, we must not negate the profound significance of the arising of this big sense of I within our experience. And should we wish to call it soul, then that is fine. There is no error in that. The only error is to perceive that it is eternal rather than conditioned. But it is the arising of this and the ease that comes when the lower mind stops that gives that sense of bliss and completeness and personal fulfillment that we might have been longing for, because it is only disturbed by our mind. Our mind is disturbed by countless things it doesn't like. But the soul, if you wish to call it that, the Buddha did not call it that, but this deep fundamental ground of my being is not disturbed by anything but our mind. And as soon as our mind stops disturbing it, we are in a profound state of peace that moves us greatly. And the next thing that arises in that moment is a deep, unwavering and growing sense of love for what we are. So we mustn't underestimate the importance of developing our relationship with that aspect of being that becomes this witnessing presence. But we also have to understand that to free ourselves completely from all conditioning and all states and all capacity to suffer, we have to let go our attachment to that and enter into a more unified state where all sense of self is gone, and with it all sense of separation is gone. Now that is something that maybe we don't seek personally, because we're still seeking a personal resolution to our spiritual practice, a verifying sense that there is meaning to my life at a personal level. So it usually is the case that it's not until we've broken through the veil of ignorance that convinces us that the lower mind is self, me, I am that, come to land on the ground of this witnessing presence is I, matured our relationship to it, found that relief that we were looking for, and then, as the Buddha said, release and let go our final attachment, which is to that, so that we can enter truly back into the ground from which everything is arising. And in that moment, we realize we are one. All right. I hope that's clarified to a degree. I know it's not easy to understand, which is why there's so much confusion about it. But listen carefully while you meditate and review what I'm saying, and start to develop this relationship to start with the clear light in your heart, and turn away from the display of your mind and all the brilliance that it might produce when you are starting to get into a more elevated state. This is all distraction. It's only a display of mind. Start to rest in the clear light of awareness, and that becomes your teacher. All right, thank you.